Hello, my name's Tim Kenny from Tim Kenny Surveying, and today I wanted to talk about assumptions. So we as surveyors kind of carrying out pre-purchase surveys, we really only kind of see the face of the building, if that makes sense, external face, the internal face. We're not carrying out invasive inspections, we're not opening up the structure. And as a result, we have to make quite a lot of assumptions. We have to kind of use our knowledge of construction technology to assume or kind of to make a kind of an estimate of what we expect to be behind that surface. We make an assumptions about the type of material that was used, about the detailing that will be behind, the plaster or behind the render or behind the brickwork, based on the age and the construction type. And this is something that we all have to do. Now, it's one of those things that there has been sort of little bit of concern about this, on surveyors forums and in my conversations with other surveyors as to whether it's actually still safe to make certain assumptions in light of the case of Hart and Large. Now, if you haven't read the details of Hart and Large, that's fine. I would advise you to kind of go and look into it because it is probably one of the most important cases that has happened in the residential surveying field for a long time. A lot of important areas in relation to professional consultants, certificates, a lot of information, it may have a massive impact on how damages are calculated. Although the judge in that case said it was an unusual case and he wasn't intending it to apply to lots of other situations, reality is with case law, it will get applied in other places. Claimants will use it wherever they can to try and push up their damages, etc. So it's important to know and to understand what happened in that case and how it relates to surveyors. But the key area I want to talk about today is how it affects how what assumptions we surveyors can make. Now, just to kind of give you the brief relevant facts in terms of that case, the surveyor had made an assumption that there was a damp-proof cause present, based on the fact that it was a relatively recent renovation of the property plus some extension work. So standard practice would have been for a damp-proof course to have been fitted. He couldn't see it, but he kind of made that assumption based on what he could see and the fact that at that time he was not seeing any evidence of damp. And a fairly reasonable assumption. Problem was the judge found that actually that assumption wasn't safe. Now, it wasn't actually that the judge decided that it wasn't safe to assume a damp-proof course is present when you can't see it. There was actually expert opinion that said actually you should always be able to see a damp-proof course. Now I've seen plenty of properties with damp-proof courses where you cannot see them, so I'm not sure that expert opinion is 100% sound. Again, I haven't seen the property, haven't read through that expert's opinion, the expert's notes, findings, report, and everything else. So I'm not going to cast aspersions on that. But in my experience, you can get damp-proof courses that aren't visible. But I think it's important to recognise that was an expert opinion. It wasn't a finding in law, as it were. It was literally in that expert's opinion, in that property, the surveyor should have been able to see the damp-proof course if it was present. Why that's so important is because some people have kind of taken that to mean, if I can't see a damp-proof course, I can't assume it's there. Well, actually, no. We've got to look a little bit more closely. So, in that case, the expert said, well, look, you should have been able to see this. So therefore the judge found that the surveyor was wrong to make that assumption. And that's quite a key distinction in that there still has to be something to throw off the standard assumption. Now, if it had been rendered and plasterboard inside and there was no access to the damp-proof course, now obviously you can talk about bridging of the damp-proof course and everything else, but let's put that aside. But in that instance, if it would have been physically impossible to see that damp-proof course, I feel that it would still have been a safe assumption to say there is a damp-proof course present. Because you're not seeing anything to suggest it's not there. If that makes sense, it's it's a subtle distinction, but it's not that we have to see something and we can't assume it's there. We can assume it's there unless there's some evidence that counteracts that, and there's nothing new in that. That's how it's always been. We look at a building, we make assumptions, we work to those assumptions unless something proves otherwise. To kind of maybe take a slightly more clear-cut example to make the point. So if we inspect a property and we believe it to have cavity wall insulation. It may well be because we've seen a certificate, or it could be that it's of an age and type where we would expect that to be present. And we carry out the inspection. We don't have any access normally to the cavity. We can't see the insulation directly in most cases, and therefore, we're not, until we're proved otherwise, we can assume that it's got some insulation in it. But actually, if it happened to be that during that inspection, a section of the cavity was available for inspection, whether that be, I don't know, maybe around a meter housing, or we could get it from the top, or someone had just cut a hole in it, which can happen. And we looked in that, and we saw no insulation in that section. As a surveyor, you've seen something that may counteract that original assumption, therefore you should change your assumption. So you could say, okay, well, look, I would normally expect this to be insulated, but I have seen this evidence that tells me that maybe it isn't. Therefore, the client needs to look further. And that's where that kind of subtle distinction comes in. It's not that we should look at every property and say, well, I can't see the insulation, therefore I don't think it's present, or I'm not going to assume it's present. We can assume it's present until something else proves otherwise. And that's kind of the same for everything. You can apply that for the tray, the cavity closing tray above the windows. We never normally see those. Some properties, the edges are visible, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to see them. But you can assume it's there because nothing's going wrong. Now, obviously, if we're getting damp above that window, or something else implies that it's not there, then you change that assumption because you've got some evidence. And I think this is the key thing, is there still has to be some evidence to change that assumption. Now, I'm not saying this to kind of say that, I don't think the surveyor in that instance, personally, I don't think he was wrong. I think he made a lot of good calls, and he did what pretty much all of us would do. I think there were very special circumstances in that case that changed the outcome, which I think don't usually apply. But I think that's why it's also important that we as surveyors push back against this idea that we can no longer make assumptions because of Hart and Large. No, we can make assumptions. We just have to really probably make a little bit more effort to note down perhaps where those assumptions came from, and even find some way to be clear that there was nothing that counteracted that original assumption. And that's the key thing. You're saying, okay, I've seen this, therefore I'm going to assume this. You carry on your inspection. If you then see something else and go, actually, you know what, that doesn't tie up with that. That means maybe there is something else going on. Therefore, I need to change my assumption. If that change of assumption means there is something significant that might impact your client and impact the choices they make, that means they should go away and investigate further. What it doesn't mean is that just because you can't see the damp-proof course, because it's rendered or whatever is going on, you shouldn't tell your client to investigate further because they definitely must find that damp-proof course. No, it's just a question of making an assumption, really maybe even test that assumption in every way you can by the scope of your visual inspection, make it clear to your client that it's an assumption, and also be prepared to change those assumptions. Keep it in your head that it is an assumption and that you can challenge it as you go along. That way then you can report back to your client kind of confidently in yourself, in knowing that you've done your job properly and you've kind of protected yourself, which is important, but also you've given your client an understanding of the level of risk. And it's all about giving them an understanding of the level of risk that comes from the property they're buying. You know, you can say, yeah, I have assumed this, I've seen nothing to counteract that assumption, therefore it's great, but you know, you're still saying it's an assumption, so there's some risk in that. Or you're saying, look, I would normally expect, you know, this detail to be present, but actually I've seen these few bits and pieces that suggest something else might be going on, or it might have been done differently, or that might just be missing completely. Therefore, you as the client need to go away and investigate further. That might be opening up, that might be looking at the documentation, it might be getting a PCC or whatever is required, but that's what you're doing to them. What it doesn't mean is that you can't make any assumptions and you have to just say, you know, literally just state what you can see. Much as it's important to state the things you can see, please don't feel that you need to avoid all those assumptions. That's just my take on it. I might be wrong. I'm not a lawyer. You know, we as surveyors don't have access to all the background information in this case. There may be something that I'm not seeing. If there is, please do let me know. I'm happy to kind of really, you know, I'm just trying to kind of understand these things and put these into the context of how I can work as a surveyor as well. So if there's something that you think might be helpful, please do let me know. Thank you very much.